cool. So I think the chat we just listened to that Vitalik gave a perfect intro into kind of what we want to explore during this conversation and introduce you guys to what we've been working on and how that kind of lines up in the context of that.
So yeah, I guess well, I have my own microphone, sorry. I guess let's just start with, we're going to walk through like a historical evolution of how people have launched or sold tokens and the different chapters that we've seen and the macro themes at this like beginning stage of blockchain, which is the first use of a smart contract was to create a token. So we've kind of advanced now beyond that a little bit, but still at the end of the day, we're building the foundation to a new financial ecosystem. So as of right now, things are lending and borrowing and swapping and trading, but those are the pillars. Those are the pillars that create all human infrastructure and commerce, essentially. So they're quite primitive, but it makes sense because this is what humans have been doing for thousands of years. So we'll walk through the stages. So chapter 1 is kind of like the Wild West. This is from a macro theme, what we like to think of as 2016 to 2018, high innovation. But the macro themes here are: what is it? Where can I buy it? Who's allowed to buy it? Who's allowed to sell it? Where do I sell it? How do I transfer it? These were all these discovery stage themes of what are these things? They're being introduced to us. What do we do with them? And ultimately, what is this? So during this time period, I guess some of the characteristics, to some positive ones and some negative ones: high innovation, unfortunately high fraud. Most of these tokens had really terrible incentive design or mechanisms. Popular theme then was just to pump through a payment token that wasn't tied to absolutely any use, work, or resource sharing, and kind of the birth of the shitcoin. There was really bad distribution done. There were multiple different attempts at different ways to do airdrops, but ultimately that really wasn't solving any problems. What you were doing is just dropping tokens to individuals that were most likely just speculating and already speculators to begin with, so it just actually increased the speculation and not really the distribution. In small ways, maybe, because it eventually did add liquidity to the system, and who knows who picked up the other side of it. But ultimately, the distribution was weak from a mechanism perspective and a methodology and a standard perspective. That really led to centralized ownership, which we still see today with VC coins, which is kind of not part of this chapter, but like still a little bit as well. It exists in both chapters, but even worse today than what it was at the beginning. This led to also ICO pooling, which is actually, in my opinion, kind of cool, and was a way for a bunch of people to come together to fill in accredited positions that they weren't able to fill otherwise. So that appeared to be centralized, but those pools were made up of one degree of decentralization. It's not super decentralized, but it's the beginning of all this. So at least the pooling aspect added more individuals, which we think is interesting. And another thing, obviously, is like flipping tokens on exchanges, crazy valuations, a hodl mentality. The hodl mentality came from a few different reasons. One of the main reasons is that there was nothing to use these things for. So I had to hold on to it because I couldn't use it. Most of these tokens were launched without a network. Most of them were launched with just a white paper. And ultimately, all of these things, as they compiled each other, led to there's no utilization of tokens whatsoever. And no one's really using these things. And they're meant to be used, and these networks are designed to inherently gain strength as people use. So we view that as chapter 1. And from a broad theme, this is 2016 to middle 2018-ish.
And this kind of takes us to the second chapter. This is the chapter that we find ourselves in today and how we interpret it. So crossing the chasm, just to give some perspective on that, I think we're in a really interesting time period at the moment, both in relation to kind of coming out of the bear market and seeing how we're evolving our thinking about incentive designs and new and improved ways of token utilization, how that plays into the networks. And I'm going to run you guys through a little bit of how this is characterized. I don't know if you guys woke up in January 2018 feeling really great, but I was part of that train, and it's interesting because since then we've seen a huge amount of market clearing, right? And you can almost think of it as those who have weathered Those who have weathered that winter have drawn strong lessons from what we've seen previously, right? So people have come up with better ways of designing their protocols and their network incentives. We've seen an increasing rise in kind of what dominates now in the consensus algorithm sense, proof of stake networks and derivatives of proof of stake, right? And this kind of all ties in with now the way that we think about holding tokens, right? You're now engaged or you're incentivized to not just hold them, but to contribute to the network. So utilization becomes a fundamental pillar of the way that the entire machine is working now, right? So if you think about it like this, just hodling your tokens, which as we talked about in the last chapter, was kind of a predominant emphasis of how people and participants in that network engaged, is now becoming increasingly more costly to do. So if we look at what's going on here, if you want to do, say, an optimistic extrapolation of what we see in the adoption space, right? If you look at the unique addresses registered and Ethereum's network utilization reaching up to 95%, we can extrapolate from that we may be entering into a new chapter, right? But looking into that chapter, what is it that people care about now, right? So Collin touched on it earlier. People still care about where can I get my tokens, right? Who can sell them to me? But now we're getting into a phase of what can I do with these tokens? How can I use them? And where can I go to use these tokens, right? So what are kind of the issues that we see in getting broad stream adoption on these things, and what are kind of the hurdles that a lot of people have been touching on in the previous talks as well? So UX and UI friction, right? So there's still, compared to Web 2 interfaces, right, a lot of UX and UI friction that you have in onboarding and guiding users through the experience of interacting and participating in decentralized networks. At the same time, a lot of things that we're seeing, especially in the way that we're aggregating opportunities of engaging in these networks, is fragmentation of that experience, when really all these things are built to be modular and integrated with each other to foster better opportunities for token holders and to understand their respective opportunities in participation, both in inter and intra-network participation. So regulatory uncertainty, we've seen in the previous chapter, there was a sheer lack of regulatory guidance, which kind of led to the natural consequence of what it led to in terms of the ICO boom. There is more stringent regulation that has been imposed since then, but really there's still a lack of general guidance and standards in doing network launches and how they should be structured, carried out, and enabled to basically promote fair distribution and fair pricing. And then the last part being there's still a very large educational barrier, and finding better methods and mechanisms to guide people through that educational step, right? And explaining in easy terms what staking is, how you can participate in it, right? And guiding them through that experience. So from that perspective, I think there's three fundamental pillars, right? It's building the right standards to navigate or to help networks launch in fair, transparent, and distributed ways. Building an educational pillar of guiding new participants and not just the crypto enthusiasts through the experience of participating in networks. And then sort of the third part, which is building better interfaces for people to understand what's going on.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of like where we were and then where we're at today, and what we're focused on is where we're going to go tomorrow and what makes the most sense in this space. There still are a number of active projects in the space who are still focused on launching tokens in ways that we don't necessarily think are the healthiest way to do it. As Mara alluded to, there is no guidance on this, so it's pretty much up to each party who decides to step into this space. It's up to them to base their methodology on risks that we don't know exist exactly. It's almost worse to have no guidelines than some guidelines, even if they're strict. So what we're focused on now is what we like to call Activate, which recently came out with, and we'll kind of walk you guys through why why it's different, what we're building for, and kind of the world that we vision moving forward when it comes to launching and using tokens and what we think makes the most sense. So ultimately, you can think of Activate as at the beginning of Activate, we're focused on two key stakeholders. Stakeholder number one is being the token holder and the participant in that network. And what we provide for them is launches of partners that are fully vetted, where all of the token economics and the mechanism design, the team has been vetted with background checks and also, I guess, technological know-how. So we vet the teams fully. We go through this whole process with them so they can guarantee that what they're receiving at least has our stamp of approval, and that's weighted as however they'd like to weight it. The second part here is that mostly the way that this works right now, and this is due to fragmentation, which is one of the issues of, is that if I have a token and I want to use it, there's probably a few different ways that I can use it, but there's probably also like a few different platforms to use it on. So then while using it, there's this thing where are my tokens at? What is going on? I have to track and manage all these things. For me, for example, like I bought token sets. I backed it up through Fortmatic, through my cell phone number at the beginning when all this stuff launched. Recently had my backpack stolen with my UK SIM card in it. So now it's been like tracking down where are my sets at? How do I get my sets back? So ultimately, the fragmentation we think that exists in this space is it makes sense based on where we're at, but ultimately it's about people stepping in and trying to help fix that. So that's what we're here to do for the token holder, and how we serve them is to provide them a holistic platform where when they participate in a launch, this is also the same platform that they use in, and also then in iterations manage and then have other use cases for their portfolio of tokens. The second person that we serve is networks. If you're a decentralized network and it makes sense for us to work with you, which is a multitude of different things, what we can help you do is that leading up to mainnet launch and all these other things are like super important steps, and they're part of the puzzle pieces that eventually get you to that end puzzle. But ultimately ensuring that the launch that you do is done in a very distributed manner with a group of individuals who actually want to participate, and trying to do everything we can to get away from this IEO model or this VC coin model, essentially, which is developed today, which is still rampant with speculation. Nothing has really changed. But it's a matter of, if you're a decentralized network, we have a methodology that will help you bootstrap your network from the very beginning and ensure that that initial distribution is wide, and that the people who do participate in that distribution leading up to mainnet will bootstrap it and use the tokens inside of it. And we'll get into kind of how we do that and what that looks like.
So here's a little sneak peek, but let's touch back on some of the points we touched on earlier. So the key pillars or guiding principles of the methodology that we're trying to work with when building out this platform is enabling both networks and token holders throughout the life cycle of the network, right? We're not just focusing on the launch period, because there's a lot of periods that come after, right? Bootstrapping your network effectively and then ensuring that it's lively and performant and secure. Right, so what is the first pillar, right? Making it easy for people to participate in the networks for network native functions, right? Obviously, these will depend on the networks themselves, but you can think about it as if there's a delegated proof of stake network, right? Do I want to delegate my tokens? Do I want to stake my tokens? If there's a voting function attached to this from a governance perspective, this can be your home for using your tokens to participate in these networks, right? So that's the first pillar. The second pillar, education and providing data-driven insights so that people understand what is the network's health, how is it performing, where can I see all of this information about people who are participating in that network and like service providers as well, right? Guiding that through transparency and being able to enable token holders to make data-driven decisions at the end of the day, both about their portfolio, but also in terms of the insight and transparency of the networks that they're partaking in. And I guess the third part of this, which comes with the user experience in general, right? So for us, that's a key emphasis. We want to make sure that we don't just target a user group that is crypto native and enthusiasts at core, right? For us, it's also kind of moving into the next chapter and being able to educate people on participating?
It's super crucial at this stage, and that's kind of just us as ConsenSys. That's like where we fit in this puzzle piece. Is that I think everyone's done a really good job in the community of getting like this core group of users and people into the space. But like right now, what we need to do is expand that circle of individuals in our world, and we need to develop applications. We need to develop processes and user onboarding flows and environments that people are comfortable with in the Web 2 world, or people who participated at the beginning of this, call it 2017, 2018, they got involved just at the most simple level, which is getting the underlying and going through all those friction points of getting into the ecosystem. So we've kind of divided this up into 4 user groups, and like user group 1 through 3 all has like ETH to begin with or Bitcoin at a minimal, and then user 4 doesn't have any of it at all. So what we're trying to do is create this experience and the methodology around people who care about doing distributions in the right way, which is the core users of blockchain, but then also create an experience for someone who's never participated in a network launch before, or someone who's never staked a token and has earned rewards before because they didn't know that it existed. So it's about also expanding that bubble, and that's something that we as ConsenSys take on in different capacities, and in this right, what we're trying to do is get more users inside of DeFi in a different manner. So I guess let's talk about the standards of like the way that it goes about. So the standards that we use are based on like the consumer token framework by the Brooklyn Project that has been reiterated on over time, and I believe it was started in 2017. This is a light list of what the standards are, and probably the most important ones to talk about. So registration for token sales is open to everyone except for non-sanctioned countries, and yes, this does include the US. So that we are comfortable with the methodology that we have with entering into the US and allowing your average person to participate without having to use a VPN, and they can just do so in like a normal manner so that this all can just be normalized. Tokens can only be used initially. So what does that mean? A core component of this is proof of use, which basically if you're a participant in a network launch, we restrict your transferability of that token until you prove use for a set period of time. So this is a way to deter speculation, but this is also a way to ensure that your network is being utilized at the very beginning. Because token holders cannot do, so it's also an indefinite lock. It's not like after 1 year you can do whatever you want with them. It's an indefinite lock to where you must prove your use. That kind of takes care of point 2 and 3. We only do these things with mainnet launches, and they coincide within 30 to 45 days of a mainnet launch. So that's a required status of the project that decides to do this with us, is that it's not the white paper only. It's not the we have a test net. It's you have to be approaching mainnet launch, and this can only take place between 30 or 45 days before this is about to take place. Token purchasers must participate in an assessment test as a way to kind of gauge their knowledge of the usability of the token, but also the knowledge of the protocol. And it is a pass-fail, like a hard-fail type environment. It's not penalizing, it's more educational, but ultimately there is a test that you have to pass, and you have to show at least knowledge of how the protocol works and what you would do and use the tokens for. And then we do KYC and ID verification as well, which has become fairly standard in the industry. A key point on here that was left out due to space issues, but there's also no discounts in this environment, which for us is kind of very clear, but I think it's important to get that across. There's no discounts. This doesn't exist anymore. This is 100% fair pricing across the table. Everyone who participates, from your average person who's coming in with, call it $10 to $100, or someone who's coming in at a larger ticket, it is all register, first come, first serve. No one's given special treatment. It's all fair pricing, and it's the best way that we've come up with, is to do a fair distribution. So let's just kind of lay out the standards and what they mean for a fair distribution. So one of them is that it's open to everyone. So anyone can participate aside from non-sanctioned countries. These tokens must, like the users must prove their use inside of the network as well. So it bootstraps it, plus it gives it a wide distribution, and then ultimately everything is fair on the pricing side. So those are kind of the three pillars, and then there's some tack-on things that are added to it. But these are the standards that like we believe should be a no-brainer inside of all of this. It's kind of amazing to see that things are still happening the way that they are, and IEOs are dying out, and now there's really no methodology. So this is kind of something that we've been working on for a while, and we feel it's like perfect time to kind of bring this back to the table and reintroduce the standards.
The standards, like, those standards basically are what Token Foundry had though, right?
They
They match, like, one-to-one?
So I would say that the standards that were published by Token Foundry were based on the Brooklyn project as well. And since time has, I guess, evolved more since then, there are less things in that set of standards that are needed than what once were. But the standards, regardless of what the entity is using them, are a consensus-based effort, not a Token Foundry-based effort.
So yeah, it was an industry initiative, right,
Yeah.
to drive towards, or I guess navigate a territory of like regulatory uncertainty and provide a framework for setting a standard in the industry.
What would you say is like one of the core, like the proof of network? Could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think Collin touched on it. So the way that we have, so let's take a step back and like let's go back to chapter 1, right? What was one of the main reasons why HODL became the mentality that guided a lot of that behavior, right? Because there was actually no mainnet that launched for you to actually use the tokens in the network, right? So speculation was really the only thing that you could be using your tokens for. So proof of network for us is the network launch partners that we partner with are networks that are at a certain degree of technical maturity, right? For us, it's critical that once there is a token distribution event, that participants can actually use their tokens in the network. So proof of network for us is within 20, 25, 30 days of the actual token distribution event, there is a mainnet for people to actually partake in the network.
And regardless of how soon or late the mainnet follows up, all those tokens that were part of that distribution, proof of use is attached to all of them. So, it's just a matter of that clock starts when mainnet does go. So at the end of the day, everyone's incentivized to it only makes sense for this process to exist in coinciding with the mainnet launch.
Have you guys like looked at how the proof of use, how to build in like seeming non-gameable proof of use systems, right? Because certainly like for the foam example and for most other examples of proof of use, like it was basically just like click here, delete 20% of your tokens, and then you can trade them forever, right? Like that's certainly how most proof of use systems to date have sort of been used. Do you guys have any other like methods to stop that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it would be, I think, beneficial for us to know about like attack vectors, and if like you've seen them or you've used them before. I mean, we've kind of sussed out the approach as much as possible, but it's when this methodology was used before, it was like ahead of its time. So, and there's been quite a few improvements made since then, but yeah, we'd love feedback on that.
I mean, I think, and this is kind of my personal opinion on the topic, right? But whether you call it proof of use or whether you call it a work lock, there's different people exploring a way to deter speculation in these systems, right? By actually not just looking at the way that they're distributing, but who they're distributing to. And those are participants who are actually going to add long-term value to those networks, right? And these are different mechanisms and people are trying out different things, and I'm actually quite excited to see how that evolves. And less than a friction point, it should be seen as an opportunity to educate people who aren't educated about how participation can earn them rewards, right? But also effectively bootstrap a network as it launches.
If the token's designed the right way, why wouldn't you want to use it? Because if we're going to move into a POS environment, which I do believe that most of these things will for the next, I guess, maybe decade or under, we shall see. But ultimately, if you're not participating in the network, then you don't get rewards, and therefore your participation level in the network is slowly diluted over time. So in a sense of where if using your token means that you don't get anything in return for it, I can see people wanting to try to game that system. But if the token's designed better, which we've now hit a more mature level of incentive designs, then using it should be a no-brainer. We're actually rewarding you for doing what you're supposed to do at the end of the day. So it makes a bit more sense now as things have matured.
Cool. So that's it, guys. First up, so activate.codefi.networks is the URL if you guys want to sign up. On our side, pretty exciting, but we're soon going to be announcing our first launch partner. So stay tuned for that. That should come within the next month or two. Let you talk about some of the other initiatives for driving, both kind of around a similar momentum and essentially puzzle pieces that fit together with.
So Activate's part of a networks group inside of ConsenSys, and right now we've been kind of like rapidly prototyping and building different stuff in the DeFi space. Some of it we've come out with, a lot of it we haven't. So a couple other efforts that we're doing around like education, transparency, and this broad theme of like this next chapter of use and how we communicate things inside of it. DeFi Score is something that maybe some of you have seen before, but it's an open source rating methodology for borrowing and lending protocols. That's also something that has existed inside of networks and has kind of branched out, which recently had an update and is about to come to the market with another update, which will be much larger. The ETH2 calculator is also something that we're working on in collaboration with the foundation. And these are different ways to basically provide transparency, insight, and education as to, how do the economics of ETH2 work? How is the machine designed? How do I participate as a validator? What are the tools that I need to do so? And then ultimately that effort out of the calculator will also stem into working with the foundation on the actual deposit ceremony interface and helping them with some design and education work around that as well. So these are, the ETH2 calculator, DeFi Score for us, these are more kind of community efforts, but we've kind of, like I said, taken on this, how do we grow users, how do we educate, because, we're not here to monetize. I mean, some of this is monetizable, but other parts of what we're doing inside of networks is super educational, because we think that's crucial right now. So check out the 2 Telegram groups if you guys want to get involved and participate inside of that and voice your opinions if anyone has thoughts on it. And we're also looking to expand as well on the dev side of the equation. We have a whole list of different modular things that have been built that need to come together, and we also have some other roadmap ideas as we iterate on Activate and what V2, we kind of already have what V2 and V3 look like, and we're excited to get started on building them. So thanks everyone for coming out. You guys skipped the MCD chat to come hang out with us, which is cool, so really appreciate it.